Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting with Greg Brewer of Brewer Clifton from the Santa Rita Hills. That's in Santa Barbara wine country, a little north of the town of Santa Barbara. Greg, welcome, and tell us about Brewer Clifton and where you're located and what you're making.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Brewer Clifton's located, the winery's located in the city of Lompoc. And all of our estate vineyards are within the Santa Rita Hills appellation, to which we've devoted really the vast majority of our whole tenure. I was a part of mapping the appellation back in 97. We started in 96. And so essentially for 28 years of my life, I've worked on a 4-mile stretch of Highway 246. I'm a simple guy. And that's been my sandbox, so to speak. And it's been amazing to really wed oneself to an area that way. You become really intimate with it. And there's nowhere else I'd rather work.
And with Brewer Clifton, you're producing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Is it estate fruit, purchased fruit, a combination?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. So when we started, we purchased fruit. We started the project with $12,000 back in 96. So we purchased a couple of tons of fruit. Chardonnay and Pinot has only been Chardonnay and Pinot. One site was within what would become Santa Rita Hills, and then the others were actually in Santa Maria at the time because there weren't many vineyards in Santa Rita back then that were available. People were starting to plant, and we kind of got on that wave, but that's how that started. And then, the little engine that could, with our 10 barrels with which we started, kind of under the Negociant model, we were very well received in the media, which is fortunate, shortly thereafter, which helped to kind of propel us to different parts of the marketplace and different volumes. And so we started our own farming team in 2005. We took over a vineyard called Mount Carmel. And then in 2007, we started planting our own kind of bespoke vineyard sites, starting with 3D and then Machado and then Hapgood in kind of 07, 08, 09, respectively, before the economic downturn kind of threw us into a little tension. Our vineyard acquisition situation kind of stalled, for lack of a better term. So from 2012 onward, we've been only estate. So we grow our own fruit. And in fact, in 2011, we relinquished a handful of really stunning epic vineyards, and some people thought we were crazy for so doing. Clopepe, Kargasaki, others that were epic, and we had a following, and our mailing list loved them. And those farmers were amazing, and the sites were amazing, and the fruit was great. It was simply for us like putting a ring on it. It was when you plant something and it's yours, it's just you own it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And our estate vineyards are cool too because we lease the land, so we didn't have the means to buy land, nor did we want to buy land. Because we've worked in the area for so long, people trust us, we know everyone. And so it's a beautiful synergy where there are people that have magnificent ranches, and oftentimes they're a little bit idle. There might be some cattle or some row crops, whatever. And so for us then to come in and to lease these 12 or 15 acre parcels here and there allowed us to kind of patchwork through the appellation to diversify our wines. And then also to be able to get involved with kind of a low entry cost, so to speak. The planting wasn't cheap, don't get me wrong, but the land purchase wasn't part of it. And then it's neat because now with Machado and others, we're able to promote and further the names of these beautiful farming families in our area, which is very important to me. As we've been embraced by the community, it feels very rewarding and nourishing to then kind of go out into the market and further their names. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very meaningful. And also for them, they've got a nice, consistent source of income now. It's not going to make the ranch, so to speak, but, a few grand an acre on 15, a year is like a salary, right. And if a cow or two had walked across it, it would have held less value. And so I love that we're kind of helping to maintain some of these places, which was challenging. I mean, farming and ranching is hard and it's expensive, and there's crazy, weird taxes and expenses that are overlooked sometimes. And so it's nice to help in that. It's fun.
And what is your total acreage, and then what is your total case production?
Total case production these days hovers around 10,000, more or less 8 to 10 probably. And then the 3 vineyards that we planted make up about 60 acres total. And then we were purchased by the Jackson family about 2 years ago. And then then we, as a greater company, planted an additional 130 acres in the appellation about a year and a half ago. So now there's, as a company, we have about 180 acres throughout the appellation on Highway 246. Wow. Some of which...
A lot of land in that area.
It's a fair amount, yeah. It's and a chunk of that will be devoted to us, but then a lot of that fruit will be utilized by other people within the company, such as La Crema and Hartford Court and Siduri and other people that source down in Santa Rita, Byron.
I like how you're mentioning all Sonoma producers who are going to source in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, well, they always have. I think Santa Barbara's misunderstood sometimes in that, from 1964 onward, the post-prohibition stuff, basically at least half of the fruit from the very, very beginning through till today has been outsourced. I'm not sure if outsourced is the word, but it has been sold outside of county, and that's it's I think for a couple of reasons. One, the fruit's in demand and is desirable, which is great. I think it's historically has been a little less expensive than some things up in Sonoma, and so it's nice to be kind of value add and also hyper desirable. It's kind of a nice place to be. It's like Toyota or something, you know what I mean? And kind of over delivering kind of thing. And that's, and again, there's really enough to go around, with the exception of a couple of years, like mid 90s, when fruit was really hard to come by and you had to really kind of leverage relationships and kind of do that. Apart from those couple of years, about 20 plus years ago, there's really ample supply locally. And so it's not like, all of our stuff's being ravaged by up north behemoths. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's very much like someone needs to buy it. And it's cool that there's a diversified model, from kind of larger people at home, some small, cool, garagey, upstart things, and then, some smaller and larger people out of area. And that too, from a vineyard supplier standpoint, is healthy. Mm-hmm. Because, some of those bigger people up north, they have the means, they pay on time, they're reliable. And some of the other ones can be a bit more erratic, which is challenging from a farming standpoint.
Yeah, well, as a fan of Santa Barbara County wines, I'm just happy to see other people recognize the value of it.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about you as a wine drinker and as a consumer. What's your first memory relevant to wine?
First memory... I don't really remember. I mean, partying wine coolers in high school, probably those bottles and James. Those and Coronas in the Palisades back in '86. But then, from there, I lived in France for a bit during college, and I liked wine like a college kid would like wine. I could pronounce things, but I didn't really know. I knew regions of France, but I didn't know Chardonnay was a grape. I mean, I didn't piece together the American equivalent so much. And I remember on my budget at the time was 18 francs, which would have been $3 for Beaujolais Nouveau. When it was a bottle a week of my splash out. I'd have a girl come over and make pasta and party Beaujolais Nouveau. I was a baller. And so that was my first entree, chicks dig it. I'm in. And then my first job at Santa Barbara Winery in 91, at the tasting room was really that first day behind the bar I'll never forget. And that was really a huge turning point for me in my life. And seeing within the first few moments of how everything converged in that moment. There was my education background in teaching. I love sharing information and that was there. And the monastic nature of wine production, I was kind of sensing just from seeing the back. And the sex appeal of barrels and candles and, that kind of thing. And I was just immediately taken by it. In fact, that day after work, and I got the job by chance. I wasn't even looking for a job. I just stumbled into this. And I remember driving or riding my bike home that day, and I went by Borders or Barnes & Noble and got a wine book, L'Académie du Vin wine book. In fact, I still have it. And I think I read it that night because I thought the sooner I learn more about this, the sooner I can help people feel more at ease with wine. I can field questions with, not in a lame, authoritative way, but in a demystifying way, in a calming way, in a reassuring way, because wine can be so threatening to people. And that's really for the past 30 years now. I mean, that's really been very, very important to me to never dumb things down and at the same time to kind of quell insecurities about wine for people, especially a younger demographic, you know, just so everyone sees it for what it is. It's a beautifully profound beverage, and it's also ultimately simple, and it shouldn't be threatening and scary.
Do you remember that first, or what was the most memorable wine you ever drank and what the occasion was?
Yeah, so I've had a couple, but the big turning point wines for me were both Californian. And the first one was, it was William Selliam, and it was their 87 Rocchioli Pinot, and it was December of 91, and Bruce McGuire, who trained me at Santa Barbara, it was his 10-year anniversary then, and so I had a little party at my house. And then Chris Whitcraft, who since passed away, was a dear friend and mentor to me. He's like best friends with Bert Williams was. And so he brought over a bunch of William Selliams that I'd never had it before. And I remember having that wine that night, and it just like was mind blowing. And so that was very important. And then shortly thereafter, it might have been that same month, I had won a gift certificate to Wine Cask in Santa Barbara, because I was in the tasting room. I was great at sales and giving tours and stuff, and so they always like gave me extra stuff. And so I went to Wine Cask and I got all dressed up, and my girlfriend then, now ex-wife, you know, we went, and it was all fancy, and Doug Mardrum was working the floor, and he brought over a bottle of 87 Calera Jensen Pinot, and those two wines really informed a huge part of my career. I mean, Bruce taught me all the fundamentals. I owe that guy the world. He's amazing, humble and quiet, and totally under the radar, and genius. He's been there for 40 years. But then, you know, those wines from William Selliam, Calera, as far as stem inclusion and gravity and minimal handling and kind of a quiet interpretation of sight really was hugely kind of instrumental in my formation. Yeah.
So with the two most memorable wines being California wines, and of course you lived in France, here's a big question. Traveling the world abroad, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
It's a great question. And I think quality is really, it's a kind of a moving thing, you know. I think, you know, wines with pure intent are really what I'm always looking for, you know, and so for that, that's where quality is for me. So it's, you know, is it something kind of inexpensive and humble, or is it some blingy, you know, champagne? If it's raised with kind hands and gentle, kind of well-intentioned hands, then that's kind of where I see quality. And I think one thing that I've gleaned from my French background is I'm very provincial. And so I love Burgundy, I love Oregon, I love New Zealand, I love whatever, Sonoma, great. I'm from Santa Barbara, and I'm very prideful of Santa Barbara, and I'm very defensive of Santa Barbara. And so in that regard, I think it took me a while to realize that, because I've been asked the question 1,000 times, like, oh, you lived in France, where did you work, and all that stuff. And I was just going to school, like drinking beer, whatever. And but that provincial thing has been big for me, and I think I love, again, being like espoused to a region the way French typically are, or Europeans typically are, because of history and generations and whatever. And I think sometimes in California, there's a kind of people trying to emulate sometimes or replicate something. You know, inspiration from the homeland, great, you know, but sometimes, and when I'm working with younger colleagues, sometimes I encourage them to kind of be their own thing and have the confidence in their own vibe, instead of so-and-so does this, so I'm going to do this. You know, that to me is like playing Journey covers at Disneyland on a Wednesday. You know, it's cool, right. But it's not your own. It's not authentic. It's not like be vulnerable, like stick your neck out. You be something. And so
you want to find your own voice.
For sure. And I think that voice finding is I think probably more European. And so that confidence of place resonates with me. And so maybe I'd be a bit biased towards that. At the same time, you know, I think there are a handful of beautiful people in California. I mean, tons of beautiful people in California that are super committed. Mary Edwards, Ted Lemon. I mean, you know, it goes on and on. Right? I mean, there's a zillion people that make epic wines and have forever, and they've totally like planted a flag, and they've like been that in California. And so, or Oregon, or whatever. Yeah. So it really depends. Not to be a vague answer, but it's an honest
but it's
one.
a vague answer. So if I were to come into your home, what would I find in your cellar?
Oh gosh, a lot of things. A lot of Chardonnay Pinot. Yeah. Low-hanging fruit. Yeah. A lot of old BC stuff. Yeah. Sorry. No, there's that. And then, I mean, it's funny. It's kind of what you'd expect, I guess. I mean, a lot of Chardonnay Pinot. A lot of Grenache, because of Sonia, my wife, kind of focusing on Grenache and Rhone things. So a lot of her wines now, which is awesome, and a lot of that. And then wines from friends. It's one of those cool businesses where a lot of us are, there's, I don't know, a dozen people up and down the coast through Oregon, where, whenever it comes to mind, you just pack up a box and send it, and then you don't even warn them, you know what I mean? And then a few days later, the box comes back, with their stuff. And it's really cool, because we all have tons of wine, and it's really fun to kind of taste other things and be current with like friends' work. And so there's a lot of things like that, Bergstrom and Tally and
so a lot
Hartford Court.
A lot of domestic wines.
Predominantly, yeah. I mean, there's an era when I was super, super crazy about Chablis. I still am, but like I was like deep into it, and purchasing a lot like before, like 3, 4, 5, that era. So I still have a fair amount of that, I guess. But I kind of went deep down that rabbit hole then, and love kind of that immersion that I gave myself. But really, it's predominantly domestic. I'm really proud of domestic things, and I think that too is a European trip. You think about being in Italy, France, or Spain, any restaurant or wine shop, they're going to be 99% Italy, France, or Spain, right? And maybe it's the frontier melting pot vibe in the U.S. that it's so diverse. And I'm not being dismissive of the diversity. That's fine, But I sometimes question, especially wine region places, be it Sonoma, Santa Barbara, whatever, that have lists and programs that are like heavily weighted towards Europe or something. And it's like, gosh, like we all live right here. Like we're making it right here.
Yeah. Let's celebrate what we have.
Let's celebrate what we have and be proud of what we have, and it's part of our culture. And maybe that'll come with time. We're still young, so maybe in the next couple generations, but I'm doing my best to help carry that torch.
And is there anything in your cellar that's drinking particularly well right now?
Oh gosh, everything's cool. Our wines are so wound up and high strung when they're young that those older wines are cool. Yeah, no, it's all fine. Time and place. Yeah, time and place.
So I know you focus on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Those two are pretty ideal. I think it depends on what people are into. I think if one's approach to the craft is based on like blending and that, and the kind of cliche candlelit beakers and flasks and test tube stuff, then, maybe the Bordelaise stuff makes sense, and like, oh, this 1% Petit Verdot like made the blend, that kind of discourse. For me, it's about removal of self. It's about minimizing my role in the equation, and in so doing to embolden place and to embolden sight to become a louder, greater voice. And so I love things that are more varietally quiet. Chardonnay is a perfect example for me. If I had to pick one grape, it would be that one, where the varietal itself is quiet enough and kind of humble enough, really, to enable place to really excel. And that's why, Burgundy and Chablis and, Champagne, all those places make sense because those different vineyard sites can be so distinct, even within close proximity. And I think I love Riesling and Sauvignon and Malvasia and Viognier, whatever. Those are all great. And those varietal voices for me are a little bit louder. And so, I think those are a little bit more specific. And the varietal part plays a somewhat bigger role. And, of course, there are arguments and crazy spots in Germany and Sancerre. I mean, I'm not, these are vast generalities, but I think in general, Chardonnay is really a beautiful muse to kind of express place in a very quiet, deliberate manner.
So this can always be a little difficult question for people to answer, but what's your opinion of critics and scores? I know you've been a darling of them, so you probably like...
Not all of them. Yeah, enough of them, but not all of them. Yeah, I'm not everyone's whatever. No, I think they're awesome. I think it's great, particularly with anyone who furthers like education and promotion and discourse around wine, I think is hugely valuable and contributes a lot. Particularly with journalism where context is taken into account. The reason why behind doing anything in life is pretty important. And it's hugely important ultimately for me. And so, just going through wines in and of themselves, is okay, and I guess that's how a lot of people consume them. So I'm not dismissive of that. But from a journalistic standpoint, I generally would lean towards journalism. I mean, and not, not everyone can like dive deep and spend hours and hours, like, being all cerebral about every single wine that everybody makes. I'm not arguing for that, but some awareness of the purpose behind things, and if you think about food, if you were like blindfolded and just given bites of food, where you could look at it, I guess, and then have, but without knowing the context of the restaurant, you could analyze it. I mean, you could have your commentary on it, but without knowing, like, is this a food truck? Is it a white linen thing? Is it some crazy third world country? Is it the top of a skyscraper in Manhattan? That kind of matters, I think. And so, but I think it's all important. And I think particularly journalists that are consistent, in their, with their kind of subjective thing. And I think, some journalists very sadly and inappropriately have been kind of pigeonholed into a certain style, and it's usually not altogether valid. And so that to me is a bit unfortunate, but, it's all good. Yeah, I think it's all good. And it's been very, kind of neutralized, over the past 10 or 15 years, and it, obviously it was a couple of very powerful forces for a long time. And that was, it worked out great for me, but it was, it was a little bit singular that way. And then, kind of the internet thing happened, and then like everyone was a critic kind of for a while. And that got a little out of hand, at the beginning, I think, where some people really had pretty loud voices online, without context and without really experience, and they were persuasive enough. It was kind of like, whoa, like, why are you being so adversarial about stuff? Like, what do you do? Where are you? Like, you're this virtual thing, and that's kind of gone away. Yeah. And the cream always rises, so some of that weird noise is kind of gone, thankfully. And now there's like a lot more people kind of approaching it from different angles. And the impact of it's very different too, so the social media thing has become a lot more important, and different kind of influencers, as opposed to simply like, oh, that score came out, and wine's never been better too, right? Mm-hmm. So back in the day, you pop a 90 or 91 and like the fax machine would burn up and the phone would ring off the hook, and that was great. Now, that's kind of entry level, really, right. And rightfully so. Wines are smoking these days, like across the board. And so now, the 95 is the new 90 kind of thing, and so, you start flirting in that territory, and, you still get some, momentum, but, the low 90 stuff these days is like, okay, so what?
Yeah, and with all the quality out there, it is about context and story, mm-hmm. to separate it.
And being relevant, that's why, for us, we've always, we work in a state of neutrality, and the wines have been done with a very deliberate purpose and in a very vulnerable, stripped down, naked way. And that's been helpful, I think, to differentiate them. They're not for everybody. I'm not saying they're better or worse than anything, but they're their own animal, particularly diatom. And I think that is just, it's helpful because there's so many wines that all taste awesome and they taste kind of similar. Mm-hmm. Just like cars and different things. You drive down the street and small SUVs are abundant and they all look kind of the same. Right. And so how do you penetrate something? How do you be relevant somewhere? And so that's always been on the forefront of our thoughts.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So, getting down to wine drinking, quick answers: red, white, or rosé?
White.
Or still or sparkling?
Both.
Champagne or domestic?
Both. My wife loves bubbles, so that's a go-to, yeah, that is always a good idea. She's super rational too about everything in life except for sparkling wine and ice cream. Otherwise, she's so metered, like any wine, food, experience, she's like, oh no, I'm good. Like she partakes, but she never goes over the deep end except those two things.
Those are two good things to go over the deep end.
Yeah. She's no fool.
I think I'm in agreement on those two things.
Besides marrying me, she's pretty smart.
What is your approach to food and wine pairing? Do you think there are rules to follow? Do you think, you go to the old adage of white wine and fish, red wine and meat? Do you think that rules are meant to be broken? Or how do you approach it when you're, creating a meal?
Really anything goes. I think really anything goes, particularly, wines done in a very kind of deliberate, simple way. They act as a beautiful condiment to almost anything. And because Sonia makes Grenache and we do Chardonnay Pinot, it's, those three things go pretty well with pretty much everything. And we're asked all the time, like, oh, when you guys are home, like, what do you drink? And it's kind of a joke, but we end up with our own wines a fair amount, not because we open them. We're not like that, like whatever the term would be, narcissistic. But you come up from an event and you have a bunch of half full bottles and you're like, well, here they are, it's like, why not? We'll just take the edge off with this kind of thing. But then even when we're drinking our friends' wines or whatever other wines, she's vegetarian. She loves like eggs and potatoes and zucchini, so we party that like most nights and some grilled chicken or something. And we have basically all wines with that. And really, it was really interesting on that note. There was several years back, I did back-to-back dinners in New York, and I did, one was at Per Se, and then the one the next night was at Blue Hill at Stone Barn. And it was fascinating because both were epic, but the Per Se dinner was crazy precious, and the thought behind it all, and back and forth with wines and the chefs, and it was nuts. And they were like replicating the wines through food. I mean, and the precision of pairing was insane, as you would expect it to be. And that was great. And then the next night I was at Blue Hill, and the pairings were also awesome. And it was I was like 2 courses in or 3 courses in, and there was like 50 people there. And I stood up and I said, whoa, like this food is so stripped down and raw and like authentic and like primary, you know what I mean? And these wines are too. And that was the marriage. I said, you can drink any of these wines with any of these courses, like the raw carrot that was impaled on the nail, that was like the amuse-bouche at the beginning that was like picked a second before, with whatever white it was great. And the Pinot would have been fine with it. You know what I mean? Because the purpose behind it was so pure and beautiful that synced up. And so that really was informative to me too, of like what's possible. And ultimately, if people dig something, it just, whatever works great. And I think part of the demystifying of wine is, it's crazy, especially in education as you are, it's, the word should is so weird, and the word should is in so many questions that we all field about wine from people. What should I drink? When should I? What should I eat with it? How should I store it? Should. And it's weird. The permission thing is weird. Yeah. And I think, whatever gives people pleasure, young, old, a tumbler glass, a flute. I mean, whatever makes sense and whatever works for you is the right choice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With all those empty extra bottles, half bottles, I say, that you bring home from events, I'm sure that a hangover happens from time to time. So any special remedies for hangovers?
No, and it's tough when you get older.
Yes,
wow, the stuff I used to do when I was a kid in this business, I can't even believe. I know it was tough then. It would have killed me now. There's really not much. Hydrating is helpful, and ibuprofen is helpful. But yeah, I've got no secret. Like,
you suffer like the rest of us.
Yeah, unfortunately.
What do you think that a non-drinker or someone who hasn't tasted your wine misses out on?
That's a great question. I think of our wine in particular, or of wine in general?
Of your wine in particular.
Oh, I think Santa Rita. Santa Rita is a super special place, and there's an oceanic tendency to all of the wines from Santa Rita Hills, like a saline element to the whites and a kind of savory, kelpy, kind of nori, umami vibe in the Pinots frequently that I think is very special to kind of capture like something as important as an ocean is, you know what I mean? To capture something other than fruit and process. I think it's really cool, and I think particularly with food, it works out great. You think about Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay or this diatom Chardonnay, it's kind of citrus and salt and like it's condiment type things. It's things that like lift and elevate and cleanse food, right? And then the Pinots, because we ferment as whole clusters, have like a savory, spicy, tea-like vibe to them. And that too, you think about that with food, it just kind of becomes part of food. And so I think food enhancement and like tasting an area, tasting geography, I think is something that people might miss out on if they didn't have our wines, without sounding like arrogant. But I think that's a couple things that the wines offer that I think could be intriguing for people.
So a space alien is to land on your property. They've never tasted your wine. What's the one wine you'd want to give them to introduce them to you?
Diatom Chardonnay, for sure.
Is that what we're drinking right now?
That's what we're drinking now. I keep segueing into that. Yeah, you're a tough shell to crack.
my introduction to your wine. It's a beautiful wine, and it is all about salinity and minerality, and I'm enjoying it.
I'm glad. Thank you.
I don't want to talk about it. I just want to sip it. That's fine. I'm just enjoying it while you talk. So you've had a lot of experience. You've been in the area for a long time. You've seen many vintages. We know the story that every vintage tells a different story. Do you feel that there are more things that repeat themselves, or that there's a lot more variation from year to year?
Oh gosh, where we are, it's very predictable. We have a crazy unique circumstance because our valleys open up west onto the ocean. It's cold, it's very temperate, it's a crazy long season, and acids are nuts, high, awesome. And it's, in 28 years, I've never needed to harvest because of bad weather, right? And that's a joke in this line of work. I mean, it's a ridiculous spoiled brat thing. That's like, you're a police officer for 28 years and you never draw a gun. You know what I mean? It's like, you're like, okay, sure you do. Like, are you like a crossing guard? I mean, it's like, that's, and so that's how, it's a beautiful circumstance. So, especially if I'm talking to European friends or Oregon friends or something, I always kind of frame the dialogue because it's a different language for us, the vintage variation. Sure, we have it, but it's kind of like having a bad hair day. It's like, oh, we picked a week earlier. Or, oh, we had to wait an extra week. Or, oh, I had to pick on a Sunday once. I mean, it's pretty, it's a hard knock life. I mean, it's pretty nice. And so, and that regularity of climate is what enables me the privilege to operate in the vulnerable way that I do on the process side, because there's really nothing for which I need to compensate or overcome, right? So picture that beautiful heirloom tomato in the backyard in August, or the fish that comes off the boat in Maine, whatever the scenario is. And it's like, oh, whoa, that's pristine and perfect. And so any intervention is probably going to be a negative. So if you cradle the tomato and carefully walk it inside and consume it, right, that's kind of its peak. Right. And so, and we have the luxury of that in Santa Barbara as a whole, for sure. And then certainly on the west side where I am in Santa Rita, it's beautiful, and it's what lends itself to our whole aesthetic at work, which is great. If I were anywhere else, the winery part of it would be a very different situation. If I were in Oregon or Chablis or wherever, we wouldn't operate in the way we do. But I'm in Santa Barbara, right? And so we operate in a Santa Barbara way.
Right. Are there any signs or omens that you look for that will help you predict what a harvest is going to be? Although we pretty much have consistency, so. Yeah,
no. And you kind of, it's funny, people, I think there's a shop talk thing, like before harvest, everyone gets all a little antsy and trigger happy, it's like, oh, have you started? Oh, I don't know. Oh, I heard the weather, and it's like, okay. But then you can't change it, right? So you kind of just drop your shoulders, you're married to something, and so you just, every day is its own thing. And so if you can't alter that, then you kind of breathe into it, you know what I mean? And you kind of get in the rhythm of it. And again, that's another beautiful thing about going back to your European question before, people that are provincial, or my commentary about the provincial thing. And me in Santa Barbara, as far as picking decisions or whatever, yes, I'm aware of sugar and acid. It's kind of secondary to just weird gut feeling things, like you're getting gas on the way home and the wind kind of changes and there's triggers in your head of oh, whoa, the light's a certain way, or there's weird trees you never even think about, but they change color at whatever time, and there's something that a synapse in your brain that's oh, whoa, now I should be sampling this vineyard, you know what I mean? And so you just kind of get in the rhythm. And then now we all harvest at night, which is cool. And so at nighttime too, it's really funny. It's probably like fishermen, as far as seeing lights on boats and stuff. But you're rolling up and down the highway at 2 a.m. and you see the tractor lights in the hills. And because I know every block and clone and who's picking one, or who's getting what, it's really neat because that too is very calming. You're people that go early because low alcohol is a priority, or they get off on that. Then you see that and it's oh, cool, they're picking, right on, good for them, and it's oh, I should start sampling now, you know what I mean? And then in the heat of when everyone's kind of going at it, then it's all lit up and that's cool. And then just like fishing, there's late season kind of old salty people, right, that are the last ones out before the storms come. And so Manfred's one, it's Nequinon, and then I'm going late too. And so there's always a couple of days into November late November sometimes, where I'll be rolling to work or back and forth at 1 a.m. or something, and I'll see lights up at 11 Confessions, which is one of his spots, and we're picking something too, and it's like everything else is dark, and it's like, that's cool, it's like that too is reassuring. That too is kind of reassuring. It's like, oh, right on, like the old dogs are still going at it, looking for that one last whopper, you know what I mean, before the hurricanes come.
Do you have any traditions any traditions that you do at the start of harvest as a team or as an individual?
No. No, it's a pretty, it's a relatively monastic kind of lifestyle that we have. Our work life at the winery is not, it's really beautiful, and it's very nurturing and calming, quiet. There's always music, but like a calm, it's not a frenetic kind of thing. And I love the idea of interns and teaching and bring people in, but we don't. So it's a very tight, 3-person system that we have. And, before fruit comes, it's my main assistant, Domingo, and it's like a nice handshake and a look in the eye. I'm also emotional. It's like a beautiful moment. And so we have that, but it's not like, oh, we're going to saber champagne and, do whatever with, and that's beautiful. I'm not meaning to sound lame. It's cooler probably to be nice and friendly and have lunches every day and whatever, but we don't. And then my diet changes, and I don't drink during harvest, and I work around the clock, and it's kind of it's very metered, and it's very calm, and particular. But that, and then at the very end, it's the same thing, just a handshake and an acknowledgement. But that's it, because it's our job. You know what I mean? It's not. It's like what we do.
It may not be grandiose, but it's
a big deal, though,
it's something.
And it happens.
Yeah.
And he and I both know it's going to happen, and so that's it's special. And it also doesn't make it out to be more than it is. It's kind of like that's the task at hand. You know what I mean? And I think I'm not saying I'm remotely like an ER doctor or crazy chef or whatever. So don't. This isn't a parallel. But it's kind of like, oh, you're going to some crazy surgery, and like, you have a bunch of fanfare, or you just scrub in, and like, everyone makes eye contact, and it's like, okay, like, we're trained to do this. Like, we're going to do this now without it being like some huge deal. You know what I mean? And so I think it keeps you focused. And then inside the winery, only trance music, no breaks in songs, so you can lose a sense of time. No natural light for the same reason. And all processing happens indoors. So there's no outdoor crush pad thing. So it can be day or night, and you never know. And so you really it helps you to really kind of give in to the task. I think
you do have some traditions of what you do.
Well, I didn't say we didn't. They're just not the common, pour wine from the last vintage and the first bin of fruit stuff, or...
Speaking of the music that you're playing in the vineyard, in the winery, do you have a tendency to walk through the vineyards and talk to your grapes, or do you talk to them when they're in the cellar? And if so, do you have anything to say, or do you feel that the music communicates to them?
No, there's just a different kind of connection. I think, our vineyard crew is so good, and we've been together for a quarter century, and so they know what I want way more than I do. And so when I'm out in the vineyards with them, which isn't even that frequent, it's just to get that energy, and it's so beautiful, and it's just to high five them and smile and hug them, and the squad, not the vines, and because they're awesome. I'm not one to go out and say, oh my gosh, you should do it this way, because it's a joke. It's really presumptuous, and I see young people do that sometimes, and I'm like, don't kid yourself,
you don't have
they're here every day, and they can smoke you, you know what I mean? And so there's that trust and understanding, and we don't really have titles or roles. It's all kind of lateral as far as hierarchy at our spot.
But what about talking to your grapes? Do you ever encourage them, or tell them they're doing a good job?
No, it's kind of, they just do their thing. Yeah, they do their thing.
So Greg, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A French teacher.
Which you ended up being.
Yeah, for a year. For a year before I got the wine gig. Yeah, and I loved when I taught it for a year at UCSB, and I loved that. It was a really special year for me. That came with being a grad student in French Lit, which was not my cup of tea. And so I was the star teacher, because I was I loved it so much, and I was on academic probation because my research was not that compelling. And then the job market was also challenging. So in the department, I was 21, I was pretty young too, and just living in a frat house and drinking and partying, and which wasn't a good grad school thing either. And but then, there were people in my department where, they were French, and they were getting PhDs, and they were super smart, and they were totally committed, and their job opportunities were not that abundant. And so I was like, okay, well, if you guys are shooting for that, I'm going to tap out now. I'm of the 15 of us, I'm 15. And so Yeah, I'm going to call a spade a spade. And
I think you found a better calling.
Well, better for me anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, better for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you're not working, what do you do in your free time?
I work a lot. Yeah, I work a lot. I love it. I mean, every day, really, I work. It's a blessing and a curse. Mm-hmm. It was funny. I recently, there's a colleague of ours in Santa Barbara, and he just joined us at the winery with direct-to-consumer stuff. I've known him for quite a while, and we were talking the other day, and it was really fascinating. He made reference to me as a swimming shark, and it really made sense, and it struck me, because they can't stop swimming, right? And and I think I'm probably running from something. I'm sure this one. No, I swear to God, it's more personal than your podcast if I ready for it. But it's maybe escaping something. I'm not sure. But I was wired as a kid to work comes first and work, and and that will kind of give you happiness. And so I was raised this way, and then there's a couple of other things in my life that make me this way. But yeah, no, I love what I do, and I love it more every year. And I run, so I run, whenever I can, 5-6 times a week, and I always have, and so that's good, physically, emotionally, to kind of just endorphin out and clear your head and do that. So that's really my outside activity, and then other than that, it's working really, yeah.
And for those romantic evenings, because I know you're relatively a newlywed.
Lava lamps and berry white and incense and candles. Yeah, for sure.
And what wine with that?
Yeah. Well, sparkling wine and ice cream, if I want to really,
Of course, yeah.
Wrap it up. Yeah. No, really, Sony and I have a super simple life. Yeah, so it's just, when we come home, it's nice, we just cook our simple dinner, and we do I do have candles are such a simple pleasure in life, and so at least 2 white taper candles, and we buy 50 at a time, and so light a couple candles and have tunes on and just have that and conversation, because she too works 7 days a week.
Romantic in just a daily sense.
Yeah, and that for us is really the coolest. We do, because of work, we end up doing some kind of blingy stuff, but that's usually work stuff, and it's a great experience, and we're also working, so, and I work really hard. So if it's some crazy dinner somewhere, it's I'm the worst person to sit with. It's like a wedding, I wolf the food down as fast as I can. And then, I touch all tables, I'm talking to everyone and engaging with people. And I love that, but it's not, for us on the kind of hedonistic, relaxing side. It's the two of us at the little bar in our kitchen, and, some simple food and a bottle of wine and, music and conversation, really. It sounds cheesy, but that's
No, I think we work in an industry that, by nature, it is our lifestyle. So it's hard to say that it's not part of what we do every day.
For sure.
And that kind of becomes an obsession of our life.
Or identity.
Yeah.
This is me, and sometimes when, speaking with, PR people or marketing people or whatever, sometimes, the brands are referenced or the labels are referenced, not the paper label, but the label, a brand label. And it's hard, without being lame, it's always, I would make an effort to impress on them in that, for good or bad, this is me. These things are tattooed on my body. It's me. It's me. It's not a winery. It's not like a wine. You know what I mean? It's more than that.
Yeah.
For me anyway. And so for as long as I'm around, I'm defensive of the projects in that regard, because they are very much me. Just like your business is you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you. You're intrinsically this. It's not
Yes.
one or the other. It's who you are, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's cool. And I think there's a lot of sincerity that comes with that, which I think makes everything more valuable.
So what is the best piece of advice you ever received?
I've received so much. It's hard to kind of distill it down into one thing. I think when I offer advice, which I'm loving being older and kind of being an older sibling to some younger people in town, is being aware of your circumstances, being aware of others, being mindful of others, reminding yourself that it's kind of a transitory thing. Even pronoun use is important to me, and maybe it's my literature background, but sometimes people come in, oh, my wine, I made this. It's very presumptuous, and it's almost profane for me. It disturbs me a bit. And so, and I think about it, and I explain it this way to people, we're in production, you're such a short-term steward of something, right? So think of a wine like the one you have, right? So that vineyard was planted 25 years ago in Los Alamos. So for 25 years, planning, acquisition of land, planting, stewardship, farming, gopher hunting, harvesting, bird netting, tractors, trailers, bins, all that stuff. 25 years of nurturing those vines, touching those vines, like being aware, being responsible for those vines. That fruit, so someone calls it pick, big deal, right? The fruit comes to us mid-October, middle of the night, press it fine, we're careful, we're tight, like we don't screw around, but it's pretty like monkey work, really. It's not that big of a deal. It's making a smoothie, and so it comes in, we press it, ferment it clean, get it done. This one was bottled 5 months after harvest, right, in March, and then it was released. And so now it's like in the sales force, right? And so for 5 months of the past 26 or 7 years, it was under our watch. It worked. Cool. That was like a relay race. We ran like a yard, and then we passed the baton to sales. But now sales and then consumers will have it and house it and store it and open it and chill it and do whatever. And then they own it. So I think reminding people in production that, sure, the job's important, but I think sometimes, winemakers I don't mind it because people treat me well, and it's like you walk in the room, it's like, oh, whoa, there's the winemaker. And so the ego part's stroked, and I'm not bummed on that. But at the same time, I'm quick to kind of quiet that because it is what it is. And I think reminding others that, just to be aware of like the big picture stuff, I think is important, because wine's a big deal, and we're not so big ultimately in the system of it.
Right.
And so that's one thing I like to share with others, because wine production is wine production. Some people say, oh, you consult here, you consult there. And it's not about like, oh, use this barrel, use this yeast. That's really trivial. That's like a chef saying, buy this knife and use that pan. It's like, it's kind of meaningless. Yeah. And very rudimentary. So then the key thing is kind of what we've talked about today, right? The awareness of self, awareness of others, committing to land, committing to that intent. That's really the biggest advice that I offer.
What would you say is your proudest achievement in your work to date?
Probably the Santa Rita Hills situation. I was one of like 12 people, 14 people to map the appellation. And as I get older, that was really cool. You look at the map now and you look at the borders and you see all the planting that's happened within and the awareness of Santa Rita Hills around the world. It's not taking over the world, but it's a category on a lot of people's wine lists. It's a section in a lot of people's wine stores and shelves, and people have heard of it largely. And that is very rewarding. There are a lot of appellations out there, more and more in California, and I couldn't name them all, and I'm in the trade, right? And so most people in the trade have heard of Santa Rita Hills, and so I'm very proud of that. And looking back to actually the genesis of it too, because frequently when borders become involved in life for millions of years, ego's involved, money's involved, it's countries, it's walls, it's school districts, it's voting things, it's zip codes for real estate. It's frequently that. It's kind of like this better, worse, I want to be in that one to gain access to something. And that's why they're so contested frequently. In our case, it's, when we kind of birthed the idea of Santa Rita Hills, it was very educationally motivated. So back in the mid-90s in the media, it was frequently, the reference point was the cool Santa Maria Valley as compared to the warmer Santa Ynez Valley. And that was like almost all wine things, largely because of Cambria, Byron, Biennacido, so, large, huge, beautiful Chardonnay and Pinot sites. And then Santa Ynez was smaller and, long and warmer things that were known in Ballard and Santa Ynez and Solvang and stuff. And so, we were all like Richard Sanford, myself, Kargasaki, Bruce at Santa Barbara, we're all like, well, it's really cold here. So it wasn't like a competitive thing with Santa Maria or Santa Lucia or Sonoma Coast or Russian River. It was simply, we're not Happy Canyon. You know what I mean? The motivation was very genuine. It was like, oh, we're actually cold here, so let's just be the cold side. Right. It wasn't like a qualitative thing. So the genesis was pure, and then, us all working collaboratively and very simply in grassroots was cool. And then looking back over the past 21 years, seeing it go from 400 something acres to probably close to 4,000 now is rewarding. It's cool. And seeing the signature sheet of like the forefathers kind of and being a signatory on that when I was 27 was cool. It was a neat opportunity. It was one of my proudest moments for sure.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I got 3 quick ones for you. We're
Great.
almost finished here. Finish the sentence. A table without wine is like...
Whoa. A day without sunshine. But I kind of like cloudy weather, so it doesn't really work. But yeah, that's a bad answer. Sorry. I'm bad at these kind of questions.
Okay, next 2. One. Paparazzi are walking by a restaurant and they shoot a famous person from any walk of life.
Besides me?
Besides you.
Just
sitting
kidding.
at a table.
Just kidding.
In the back.
They're always following me. It's a hassle.
In the background of this photo is a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Who would you want to be that famous person?
Whoa.
Who do you want to be drinking your wine? They can be living or dead.
Bjork.
Bjork. Wow. Okay. You're going...
She's cool.
Yeah. Going off to a deserted island and you can take 3 wines with you. What are they?
Sparkling wines, because hopefully I'd be with my wife.
Your island.
Yes. And ice cream if the island had refrigerations.
3 sparkling wines?
3 ice cream flavors and 3 sparkling wines. And my beautiful wife. Yeah.
Oh, very simple.
Yeah, I'm a simple guy.
So as we finish up here, one of the things we do with Wine Soundtrack is we like to play a little game of wine and music, since music plays a big part in wine. And I know you listen to very transcendent music when you're working, but sometimes wines will put us in a mood the way music can put us in a mood. So just thinking about a few different wines out there, if you can tell me what it makes you want to listen to or what it makes you think of. Okay. I know time and place is also relevant, but let's start with Santa Rita Pinot Noir.
Oh, wow, you're doing this to me. Yeah, everything is good with everything. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't have specific like wines and music. Yeah, it's all good.
No styles of music?
Yeah, because it's so personal.
Yeah.
And I think it's like so mood dependent. I'm into all my like deep house, trance stuff. I also love like moody, groovy, like Atlanta hip hop stuff. I'm really into that. Metal's cool. Like, I'm not a huge country guy, and I'm not a huge classic rock guy. So it's funny, like that, a lot of people, especially like the generation before me, it's like a real answer. I'm sure like the old, like the pioneers in Santa Barbara, like, because of their era and culture, like partying classic rock and listen, drinking Santa Maria Pinot was kind of like their jam. And then like when Clifton and I got together in the mid 90s, we're both kind of LA based and from the 80s, and it was a different scene, so it's more, like our musical references are those, you know what I mean? And so that's what I would put on that soundtrack, you know what I mean?
Nice way to skirt it.
Yeah.
I won't put pressure on. You've been sharing so much wonderful information. So before we go, if you can just share, where are your wines available? Are they nationally distributed? And can people visit you?
Yes, of course, both. Yeah. So nationally distributed, all 50 states and a handful of countries. So pretty available that way. We love visitation. We have a tasting room in the town of Los Olivos, which is a poetic little town up in the valley, where there's a myriad tasting rooms and a handful of restaurants. So we have a really cool tasting room there that's open 7 days a week. 10 to 5, I think. And so that's the easiest, and people can be spontaneous, and there you go. And then at the winery, we can receive guests as well at our bar there by appointment. And that takes a little more planning because there aren't many of us at work. And so that's a little more, needs to be premeditated. But that experience too can certainly be offered. And so that's that. And then, Sony and I live in Santa Barbara, and so we receive people at the house a lot too. So, that's always time and place, but that's always an option.
So we go to brewerclifton.com and we can...
Yeah, brewerclifton.com. I mean, this day and age, I'm super easy to find. Yeah. Text me, call me, find me, with the paparazzi chasing. Yeah.
Easy to spot.
Oh, yeah. All those black cars and people running after me and bodyguards pushing them back. Yeah. Look for that cloud of smoke. Yeah, no, so really easy. Greg Brewer, Google, whatever, and then like all this stuff comes up, and then just click links, and there you go. I'm very, very accessible.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, Greg, thank you for sharing all your information today. Thank you for joining us.
It was a treat. It's great to see you again. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you, and have a great afternoon.
All right, thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.